for example, in the more mystical way of understanding Christianity, it's like, it's not about doing good things to go to heaven. It was never about that. And it was never about not being able to do enough good things in order to go to heaven. It's about becoming something, that you become heaven, you could say. You're transformed into something that's free. And that's going up the mountain or moving up towards something higher. So it's more about, so the idea that, let's say, you shouldn't lie isn't about like, well, if I lie so many times, then I'll have so many years in purgatory or whatever. It's about, if you lie, you are destroying yourself and you're destroying the world around you.
Welcome to episode 133 of the Mikhaila Peterson podcast. I'm Mikhaila Peterson. This is a very special episode because Jonathan Pageau, a very cool individual, was kind enough to come on, and I got to talk about some topics that I've been incredibly interested in for a while. For those of you who don't know, Jonathan is an artist, symbolic thinker, YouTuber, the editor of the Orthodox Arts Journal, and an expert icon carver of Eastern Orthodox icons. You might have heard him on Dad's podcast talk about similar topics. We spoke about my experience finding God this summer, or God revealing himself to me, however you want to put that, the three different branches of Christianity, compassion and suffering, the meaning in narrative and how narrative might be how reality works, something I only recently started to believe, something Dad's been talking about forever. It's difficult to understand, but I think I'm getting it a bit. We spoke about Protestantism and the Reformation, hell, purgatory, and more. I asked Jonathan a whole bunch of more religious questions because I'm still learning. It was really interesting. I got kind of personal, although I do that from time to time. If you enjoy this conversation, please subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. Before we get started, this episode is brought to you by NordPass. Running Dad's business and my own, we have so many passwords, it's absurd. I've used absolutely terrible password organizers before, so I'm happy to be advertising for NordPass. NordPass is made by NordVPN, so you know it's a solid product. I can't tell you how much this has simplified my life. NordPass keeps all your notes and passwords in a single, incredibly secure location, only accessible with your master password. It also monitors password health and data breaches like Facebook and LinkedIn had recently. It does autofill for passwords and credit cards, scans credit cards so you don't have to add the numbers into the app. It has an app and a desktop app and is simple and clean to use. It's great. Put your online mind at ease with NordPass. Visit nordpass.com/TMPP, like the Mikhaila Peterson podcast, or use code TMPP before February 10th and get a free month plus 50% off 2 years of NordPass Premium. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee, but this deal ends on February 10th at nordpass.com/TMPP or using code TMPP at checkout. Enjoy the episode. I'm so excited about this talk. My dad has been talking about you, but he's here in Nashville with me right now. We're shooting some courses. Every meeting we go to, he tells somebody about you.
That's
seriously.
Yeah, it's a little humbling, I have to say, but I'm happy. I think that, when I heard your dad on the radio in 2015, I just felt like there was such a connection between the way we thought, and I think he felt the same even, when we met the first time. And so, yeah, so it's like I'm excited to support what he's doing, the way that I can. So.
Okay. He said yesterday we went to a Daily Wire party and he was talking to Ben Shapiro. He told Ben Shapiro about you. He said, you guys should connect. But afterwards I said, Ben Shapiro is probably the smartest person I've met. It's great. Like him in person, his verbal fluency, it's insane. And Dad said, yeah, he's up there among, the top 3 or 4 people I've met. But he said you were up there as well. Anyway.
So I'm supposed to call Ben Shapiro because he sent me his number. So we'll see how that goes. It'll be interesting.
That should be really interesting. Okay. So I guess before we get started, can you give a brief background about who you are and what you do?
And so my name is Jonathan. I guess I live near Montreal. I am an artist. Let's say it's the easiest way to understand what I'm doing is that I guess I'm an artist. I make art for churches, liturgical art. And so your dad likes to call me like an icon carver is even a baser way to describe me. But I would say that in that practice, I also, with my brother Mathieu, who we developed an expertise on symbolism, or maybe a way of viewing the world, a symbolic way of viewing the world, a way to recapture how the ancients perceived reality and try to bridge that with the modern world in a modern scientific understanding, modern even evolutionary thinking and everything. So I think that at this moment now, I'm probably more involved and more known for the second part, which is talking about symbolism, helping people understand these old stories in a better way, how they connect to their lives, and even how we can understand politics or understand the craziness of our world today through these old stories and through the symbolic thinking.
Okay. So how did you get started down that road?
It's one of those things it's hard to describe. In my 20s, I had a kind of intellectual, spiritual, personal crisis, you could say. And I started to search and to read and to learn. And it happened in coordination with my brother, who also he wrote a book on symbolism called The Language of Creation. And we just rediscovered, I'd rediscovered the church fathers. My brother was reading kind of rabbinical commentary. And then we started reading, I started looking at images and icons and connecting them to the Bible stories, and it just developed on its own. And then all of a sudden you realize that you've found a pattern, which you can almost guess what's there, right? You can at some point you can look through, let's say, a text for, let's say, a religious service that you've never seen and not be at all surprised what you find, because it just basically reveals the same powerful pattern that you find in scripture, that you find in architecture and everything.
Okay. We should delve into that, what that pattern is. Yeah, actually, let's just start there. So,
sure.
I don't know if you're going to be able to describe that, but what's the pattern that you found?
And so the best way to understand it is that is the way that Jordan explains it. I think Jordan has a great way of explaining it, which is similar to mine. And it's very easy to understand it that way, which is that the world presents itself to you as too much, right? The world is full of stuff, and there's too much stuff. And everything that you perceive has an indefinite amount of detail. And that detail has, it's infinite detail all the way down, right? And so despite that, for some reason, we're able to perceive unities in our experience, right? I'm able to say that's an apple, but an apple is not one thing, right? An apple is a million things. An apple is millions and millions of things, but I'm somehow able to perceive it as one thing. And so, but I'm also able to perceive parts of things and the unity of things at the same time. We kind of move between the two, right? I can look at a car and I could say, that's a car, but I could also realize, well, that's the wheel of a car, that's this part, that's the paint, that's this. So I can see parts and wholes at the same time. So the question is, first of all, how is that possible? And what does that mean? And so we have a capacity to compress reality into unities. So that happens in space, it happens with objects, but it also happens in time, right? Because time also presents itself to us as an infinite amount. Like, think about all the things that are happening around you right now at this moment, right? There are millions of things happening, but you somehow are able to focus your attention. And then you're also capable of stringing together elements to create a story, to create a connection between different aspects of what's going on. And so that's not arbitrary. That has a pattern. So there's a way in which we are able to recognize that certain events go together, and we can recount them as going together. And like I said, it's not at all arbitrary. So once you start to see it, you realize that, for example, in the Bible, in Genesis, what it's describing as it's describing the creation of the world is something like that. It's something which is helping you experience and delve into the way in which identities exist. And that takes all kinds of forms in different spheres. But let's say in a story, it's usually just like a story has a basic pattern, usually, which is something like you have a beginning point, you have a problem, and then you have a resolution. That's basically every single story is something like that. And then you can play with that, right? You could fail to have a resolution, or you could kind of play with it, but that's the basic pattern. And so you can realize that that's what even like when you're telling your day to your spouse or to your friend, that's what you're doing. You're saying, here's the start of the day. Here's a bunch of stuff that happened. And then I came back home, the end, right? Or you can make it smaller, but that's usually the way that pretty much every single story we tell has that pattern.
Okay. So let me see.
So what does that mean? Like,
yeah,
maybe I can tell you.
Why does that matter? What does it mean?
Why does it matter? All right. So the reason why it matters is that you realize that the way in which we interact with each other is also like that. So the way that we interact, like if I interact with you, there's a pattern to that. It's not arbitrary. I can't just say anything, and I can't just do anything. There are certain things which bind our interactions. And that's true of a conversation. It's true, let's say of a family meal, right? A family meal has a pattern. It can't go anyway. If you do something crazy at the dinner table, you'll ruin dinner, right? If you throw your fork on the floor, you ruin dinner. There's a million things you can do to ruin dinner, but we don't. We're able to participate almost like a dance in this pattern. And that scales up. So you can imagine, like, you have these patterns, your interactions with people have these patterns, your family dinner, your community, but that goes all the way up to something which would look like religious rituals. That is, that religious rituals, once you see that the world works that way, the idea of religion it's not silly anymore. Not only is it not silly, it's inevitable. You realize that the world actually lays itself out through rituals and patterns and symbols and stories, and there's no way out of it. And that scales up to something which would look like, let's say for Christians, would look like the Mass or the liturgy, where we have a pattern of interaction, where we all sing together, we all look towards something which is beyond us to unite us together. There's all this movement, these movements that we do that are not in any way superstitious or arbitrary, but they're completely coherent. And they are the highest image of you putting on your socks in the morning, right? Anything you do is patterned. Everything you do is a play between a pattern and let's say the potential, the moment in which you're playing. Like if you're brushing your hair, you don't brush your hair in any way. You have to brush your hair in a certain way. And there's variability, but you can't, if you brush your hair with a knife, it's not going to work. You're going to break the pattern. So you realize that the world is ritualized and patterned. And then what it helps us, at least I think it helps us reconnect to a bunch of stuff that people have tossed out and have told us is meaningless and stupid and superstitious. And it can help us reconnect to those things in a maybe a little more conscious way, but a way that can help solve the problem of meaninglessness and disenchantment and nihilism that is around us. Okay.
So I'm going to come back to that. I'm going to have to sit on that for a bit. I think I had a weird experience. I had a crazy experience this summer where
that's what I hear. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's why we're talking.
Yeah.
Is I got criticized because I said I found God, and apparently you're not supposed to say that. But
who said you're not supposed to say that?
I don't know. People on the internet.
Yeah. Don't pay attention to the YouTube comments.
But I think, so you're talking about, so I think what did it for me was there were too many, I'd like to think of myself as like logical, very logical. So I've tried to put the world I've tried to understand the world through science and facts and kind of devoid of intuition. And I think I learned that from my dad. And it took me a while to build back the intuition side and to actually take that seriously, because I thought, well, if you can't figure it out in your head, then it's not real, which is completely overestimating your ability to figure things out. But I think part of what did it for me this summer was that was this pattern that you're talking about, right? And I kind of tuned into it like you know what's been going on with my family. It's been completely absurd. But there have been things that have happened that are just too weird to explain any other way. Like when mom was sick, it was like being in a movie. Like my entire life has been being in a movie, which you could say is like being in a story. But when my mom got sick, she knew the day she was going to get better. And it was like, well, that's not, you literally can't explain that. Nobody could explain it. None of the doctors could explain it. And it was mom and dad's anniversary. And so everybody in my family was just kind of like, well, put that in the pile of things we just cannot understand at all. So that occurrence has just been like, I've just been thinking about that, just being like, how do I understand that in a logical way? And then when my dad got sick, so he was reacting to the medications he was put on terribly. That was January. I thought, this is going to be awful. I had this weird feeling like this is going to be absolutely awful for 2 years. Right. And I was like, I can run away, because I was considering moving. I was like, I could just, this is really difficult. We didn't know what to do. This is really bad. I was like, I could just run away, or it's going to take 2 years and it's just going to be like crippling. And I was like, okay, I can do that. It's just 2 years, right? Out of a lifetime, I can do 2 years. And then it was like spot on, where things were really awful and then everything just fixed themselves. And so those two things happened. And then there were just too many things like that happened that felt like I've been, I don't know, living in a story. And so I don't know if that aligns with anything you've said, because I'm having a difficult time exactly understanding what you mean. But does that make sense at all?
No, it makes sense. I think that most people have these moments, and it's true that it often happens. You can understand that this pattern of reality, it's actually reasonable, but it always points towards something which is a little bit beyond itself, like beyond reason, you could say. So often we have these crazy experiences. We could call them miracles, or we could call them that reveal to us something which is beyond what's going on in everyday life. Like it seems to kind of connect everything together in a way that is very difficult to fully account for at the lower level. And I really believe that this is just how the world works. Like this is really how reality works. Like reality is made with meaning. Like you could say that a good way to understand is that God really does fill up the world. And there are moments where we can have these things just completely come together, and you have a sense that, not only a sense, but it's like your whole being is carried up, let's say, for a moment. And it doesn't always last very long. You know, some people last longer, thank goodness for them. But for most of us, it's like a moment where you feel carried up and you're like, okay, I can't deny that. Like, I can't deny what's happened. And so what was your experience of saying that you found God? How did it, like, so you talk about your mom and everything, but in your life, like, what did that mean? Like, what did that mean in terms of experience?
Well, so that happened with my mom, and then she started practicing Catholicism, right? And I thought that was very strange, because she got really into it really quickly, right? From not being into it at all, kind of. You know, she's always had a little bit, she wanted us to go to church a bit, but it was never really part of our family life. So I was like, okay, mom's part of a cult. And it looked like that from the outside. It did. Even dad was it wasn't just Catholicism, it was some people she was around, and we were like, this looks like a cult. But she also she became a lot more empathetic and a lot more patient, and it was noticeable. And so I was talking to her about it, and just like, how did you get there? She was like, oh, well, God. Like, okay, I don't understand what that means. And so it's been about a year of me being open to the idea, but not understanding what that meant or what that felt like. And then in August, dad was really sick in August, and it was really scary. And too many bad things were happening at the same time. It was like, if things could go wrong, they were going wrong in every area. And it was like, this is way too much. This is like, this doesn't make sense. There's too much bad luck happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So there was that. I was navigating a divorce, which was bad, but everything else was so much worse that was not even the bad part of my life. So that it's just been brutal for a couple of years. And I went away for like a week when Dad was he was a bit stable, but I needed to just have a bit of time. And I went away and I met somebody who was like, "How are you doing?" And because I had talked a bit about what I was going through, about my parents being sick and like my job and the media and Dad and divorce and everything. And he was like, "How are you holding up?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm not holding up. Like, I'm not holding up. I'm not depressed, but I'm not holding up. Things are awful, right? Like, I'm crying every day, but it's not depression. It's just things are really bad." And he was like, "Well, you need God." And I was like, "Okay, that's great. That sounds fantastic. What do I do?" And he said, I don't even know why this happened exactly, but he just said, ask him to reveal himself to you. And I was like, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that." So I went home and was like begged, because I was in rough shape. I got to the point this summer where things were so bad and I couldn't do anything to solve them. And I was like, what do I do now? If I've tried every route, like every way possible to solve some of these problems, and there's nothing else I can do, what do I do? And that's when I started praying. So I had to get to that point, and it took a while. But anyway, so I went home, and so I was praying. And the next day, like all of the major issues that I had switched directions. So they didn't just go away, but things that I wanted to happen and I could see happening but weren't happening just all happened the same day. And that was it. I was like, okay. So that was wild. And then, I've been reading the Bible and just trying to learn what I can. I had some other strange experiences, but that's part of the reason I'm having you on, because this is pretty new. Even though Dad is my dad, like he comes through this from a psychological perspective and a meaning perspective. And whatever I'm experiencing now isn't exactly what he's taught me growing up, I think.
Yeah. But it's related in a way. Like it's related
Definitely.
in the sense that, Jordan talks about the idea of going down into the whale, like Pinocchio going down, or the father kind of going down, the death of the father. But you don't necessarily have to understand it exactly in the sense of the death of the father, but you can understand it as a world that is an old world that's crumbling, let's say, or something, that all these things that are kind of crumbling. And then there's a sense in which when that, the idea, you hear this about, let's say, alcoholic, right? It's like you hit rock bottom, right? You've heard that expression, but that doesn't necessarily, it's not something that happens just with addiction. It's something that can happen in many ways. That is that when we descend and things start to break down, it's very painful. But then what happens at the bottom is you get something like an inkling of a new world, or something like a light that appears in the cavern. And, and sometimes people are going to, especially scientifically minded people will find this weird, but sometimes the way that you describe it is exactly right, which is that, everything is going wrong, and then all of a sudden they realign.
Yeah.
Things realign, right? The idea of finding meaning, but it's not, finding meaning isn't just a subjective thing. That is, meaning reveals itself to you, like things snap, and then it gives you a direction. Now, obviously this was in August. So obviously it's important to understand that won't necessarily last, like that experience. It's there to show you what's possible in your life. And then later on, you're going to have a lot of problems, and it's going to happen again. Like even if you found God and let's say you kind of enter on that path where you pray and you kind of try to transform your life. It doesn't mean that it's all going to be aligned that way all the time. It's more like it's almost like an inkling of what's possible is shown to you. So you can, like a glimmer to say, like, oh, okay, this is it. Like, I need to move in this direction. But then there's a lot more pain, along the way, nonetheless.
I actually, so I'm on this like meat diet, right? In 2015, when I went off of my medication and put myself into remission and got better, that was the first time. I didn't associate it with God, but that was the first time when I could feel like I felt for my entire life that I just was the embodiment of bad luck somehow. I was like, why is it that everything I do, I have to do 4 times in order for it to kind of succeed? It was ridiculous. And even my parents commented on it. They're just like, things work out for Julian, but everything you do, whatever could go wrong, goes wrong. And so I just lived my life like that. It was just like, it was awful. I kind of got used to it. You never get used to that. It's still frustrating. And then I got better, and I had that shift where it was just like my world flipped upside down, and I associated it with health. I was just like, is this what it feels like to be healthy? But it was a really physical feeling of going in the wrong direction and then having things switch, and things were just working out. I was on time all the time. Like if I missed an assignment, there'd be a delay. And when it was due, it was things that didn't make sense, right? And so that was the first time I experienced that. And then I went off of my antidepressants. Those were the last things I stopped taking. And I lost that. And then everything was awful again for a number of years. And I just had these it's been confusing because I've been able to I've been able to think about it in a logical way where I've been like, well, this is what happened. And that's why I had those feelings. So like I went off of the SSRIs and I had SSRI withdrawal. And so I was depressed, and not being depressed is when I'm in this like alignment. But then it's just gotten too weird. And I haven't been depressed for so long, but I've still had these feelings of being in alignment or whatever that means, or going in the wrong direction. And so now I'm a Christian.
So are you involved in a community of some kind? Like, are you going to church?
We're starting to.
Okay.
So we've been to a couple of churches. I haven't found one that clicked. Like the thing that clicked. So Dad came to visit. He's still here. He's in Nashville. And last Sunday we went to, it was a gospel kind of group of people. So they were singing in one of the bars on Broadway. So that's what we did Sunday. But that made me cry. Like they'd sing a song and then they talk a little bit. And then they sing a song and talk a little bit. So there was something there, that really spoke to me. So we're just hopping around trying to find a place. Mostly what I've been doing is praying and reading the Bible. Yeah.
Wow. I can see in your eyes, like just how kind of confused and wide-eyed you are, which is actually pretty wonderful to see that. I think that how can I say this? Like there is also a sense in which how can I say this? It's like, at least what you're describing, you seem to have these extremes, and I think Jordan has a little bit of that too. It's like and so you have to be you definitely have to be a little careful, because it's almost like imagine someone who's manic depressive, like someone who has bipolar, someone who's bipolar, but it's not there's other types of bipolarity that aren't just psychological. That is, there are people whose lives are bipolar, you could say. You can see, and so you if you're attentive to that, you can maybe also try to moderate it a bit, and also try not to ride when you're up and you're aligned, try to be careful not to ride it too high, because it's also not necessarily the best way to go, if that makes sense to you, because that leads to another down. I don't know I don't know how else to explain it to you. That's going to be harder for me to explain, which is,
does it have to lead to another down?
No, it doesn't.
Because it doesn't feel like it's going to lead to another down.
I think the best thing to do is the best thing is to try to moderate the experience, like moderate your direction, you could say. But I don't it's hard to explain because it's very existential. But it's like, if you get that alignment and you start to write it, and you become, and everything's perfect, and you can imagine it this way, like everything's perfect and everything's going well. And it's like, a good Christian way to explain it would be that then you forget to pray. Like that would be a good way a Christian way to explain it, is that you get that alignment, and then you start going up the hill, and it's like everything's good and everything's fine and everything's working, and it feels like you're on top of the world. And then you forget to pray, because you pray when you're at the bottom, because you're suffering, because that's why you pray when you're down there. And so it's like when you're going up, then you stop praying because you're going up. And that's the danger. So the idea, so you could say something like moderating the experience with prayer and worship is part of it, where you're giving up your success at what you're doing up to something above you, so that it doesn't that it doesn't carry you too high.
Okay, I think, and I don't want to like be boastful or anything, but I'm hoping that I've been walloped enough times that when things are good, I don't get used to that. It's shocking. I'm like, this is completely different than anything I've experienced, and there's no way that this was me, right? So I think I'm hoping I can stay like humble during those experiences, because and I think maybe, well, I think that's also partly what brought me to where I am now, because the good experiences were also totally unbelievable.
Yeah.
Whereas like things can be so bad it doesn't make sense, but they're also so good that it didn't make sense too. So that's not me.
Well, I think it actually is you. It seems that's actually you. Like you seem to, at least the way you're describing to me, you seem to attract extremes. And so it's bound to, if you attract the extreme in one direction, there's a high chance that you'll attract it in the other direction too, you know? And so that's why, I guess that's why I said just to be careful, but I think it's wonderful. I mean, I think it's great that you had that experience and that you're also acting on it, right? Because you could have just left it and said, oh, okay, here's this experience, and then move on with your life.
No, it was way too intense to do that. There's no way. Yeah. Okay.
And so are you able to talk about it with your family?
Yeah. I mean, I talked about it, like I said, when the first time when I felt things aligned, I associated it with a switch in health. And that is part of why I was feeling better, but it was like on another level. And I talked to my family about it. And then there's some other weird things that have happened when I went, but that I've also been able to say, well, maybe it was because of this. So when I went off of SSRIs, I had SSRI withdrawal, and I got sensitive to light and sound and like touch and carbs. So like sugars and chemicals. It was awful. And it lasted for about 2.5 years really intensely. But the first time I had a severe reaction, I talked about this on Rogan. I was like, I had a whole bunch of soy and my body was really unhappy with it. And I got itchy, my digestion was upset, and I got arthritis. I got mouth ulcers. Like my whole body was very, very angry. My skin broke out. And 2.5 days later, I hallucinated a demon on my brother. And I was like, okay, that happened. I was like, okay, that looked real. It was like 1.5 seconds long. So it wasn't just a flash. It was like, it looked at me and then looked away. And I tried not to have a panic attack and was like, okay, I've gone off of my medications and now I'm crazy. Like, great. That's the most logical explanation here. But I was like, no, it seems to coincide with this soy reintroduction. It's some sort of inflammatory response, like whatever. But I had similar experiences with like faces, really terrifying, like teeth faces, off and on for about a year. Every time I tried to reintroduce a food that my body didn't like, I'd have a like full-blown autoimmune response, and I'd start seeing these like demon faces. Mm-hmm. But I just thought, okay, that's the representation of what people are most scared of, like a predator. And so when I'm having these depressive reactions, which are an autoimmune response, and my body starts panicking, then it's putting something there that's scary to kind of justify how I'm feeling.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought. But then after, that happens 10 times and then a whole bunch of other weird things happen, at some point you're like, well, are they demons? Maybe? Like, I don't know what's going on. So
I mean, okay, so
I don't know, Jonathan. I don't know what's real anymore.
Let me mess with you a little more, if you don't mind, with your mind a little bit. So the mechanical cause of these things, that is, like you say, I took this food, I had this thing. Somebody could be like, I didn't sleep enough, or whatever, like the mechanical causes doesn't take away from the meaning of the experience, right? And so you saw, like you said, you saw a demon. And so there is maybe a mechanical cause for the reason why you see a demon. But the demon you see, you recognize it as a demon.
Mm-hmm.
But you didn't see a flower. You didn't see a watermelon. You saw a demon. And so that's a real thing, right? The type of image that we associate with demons are real. They're objective. They're not arbitrary. And they have to do, like you said, with monstrosity. They have to do with evil intention. They have to do with all these things. Now, what I would say to you is, of course, you have to be careful not to let yourself get sucked into that, because even if you read saints, or if you read ascetics, or if you read kind of holy people, right, they'll tell you not to be seduced, let's say, by these kind of demonic apparitions. But it doesn't mean that they're just the idea. When anybody tells you like it's just a hallucination, those are meaningless words, because the just, what is this just? You see something and it has meaning. And so you have to be able to engage it that way and then deal with it that way, And so, and it's the same with all the other things you happen to you. Like, let's say you start to see positive things happen to you. And so you say, well, I could explain the causality of all the positive things happening to me, but you're still able to see and experience and participate in these positive things that are happening to you. And that's objectively taking you out of your rut, let's say. And so the idea that, these meaningful things happen to you, that something comes from heaven, is a good way to say it. Like, there's something coming down to you from heaven, doesn't at all contradict it has nothing to do with the mechanical causalities. I don't know if it's hard to explain it this way. It's like, So let's say you see these demons, right? So you see these demons. What could seeing these demons do to you?
Well,
right? It'll scare you.
Stop. It would terrifying. Yeah. It was terrifying. And it stopped me from you. I don't even know what the purpose of that was. Like, I have no idea.
Scaring you is enough. How can I say that? Scaring you is enough, because you see what's possible. Let's say that is you could become that, and you probably know that or the people, the world around you could become that. What you're seeing in that hallucination, the world could become that. It's an imagistic version of something which exists. Like you said, this evil that's in you, that's in others, that's around us, you perceive it. It's a real thing. And so the idea that it would scare you is enough, scary enough to say, I don't want that. This sounds like the dumbest thing that someone could say, but it's if you take just a moment to understand it, you'll see that it's actually quite meaningful to say, I don't want that. And to start to make little movements, little gestures towards prayer, you could say, so that you can be realigned. I don't know if that makes sense. It's hard to talk about this stuff in a way, especially for like more scientifically minded people to understand, but I try.
No, this is good. This is good. I can see why you and my dad are talking, because he's more scientifically minded, but you're not as far over to whatever the other side is as some people are.
Well, I try to bridge the story world and a more something which is compatible with psychology, compatible with a lot of the way people think today. But like when someone, like if someone tells you, like a very kind of literalist, uneducated person tells you, like, don't do that, you'll go to hell. They're usually telling the truth. Right? It's usually true that if you engage in certain, it depends. Sometimes they can get it wrong in the details, but there are things you can do, and there are ways you can be, and there are ways you can engage with others that will tend you towards hell, you could say, where you'll have worse experiences. And And then there are ways to be and ways to engage with others, which will bring you up. And so not everybody has those experiences more immediately the way that you had, which is like seeing demons and then seeing miracles. Like a lot of people don't have those experiences, but they're possible. They're definitely possible. And they feed the imagistic world. They feed, right? The thing you saw when you saw someone, like when you saw a demon appear, let's say, that's what horror movies are made of. They're made of those experiences. People have those experiences. They're real. And then they make stories out of them. But yeah, so I wouldn't be too freaked out about it, because there are some people that are more sensitive to these kinds of experiences. But it usually means that you might be more sensitive to the higher experiences too. Like you might have more, let's say, elated experiences ahead of you, possibly.
Well, that seems to be true. Hopefully more than the demon experiences. Those are unpleasant. So why, if there are ways you can act in order to align yourself properly, I guess we could speak like that, something like that. Why would those kind of bad experiences, like, and a more hellish version of life exist for children? If they're like, what's with that?
Yeah. What I'm going to say is going to be, it's hard because I don't want to diminish suffering. But so let's take you, because I'm talking to you, that I could tell you that without that, you wouldn't have had that experience.
Yeah. So it just takes time.
It's just that suffering can become, for some, if you're able to align it, like if you're able to embody it properly, suffering can become an opportunity for transformation and an opportunity for something which is higher, you could say. And so that's actually one of the differences between the way Christians tend to see disability or suffering compared to some other traditions, which is that there's a story, where Christ heals a blind person, and people ask him, like, why is he blind? Is it because his parents sinned? Is it because he sinned? Like, what evil happened so that this person be blind? And Christ heals him, but his answer is even more important. He says, no, this person is blind to show the glory of God. That is, that there's something about suffering that it can be transformed into something greater. And I think, like, I remember Jordan having an intuition of that once when we were in Montreal and we were going to see the totem pole that was put up by his brother, and he said that he had suffered quite a bit, and that suffering had been refined into gold, and that's what his art was, basically. And so I was like, Jordan,
Charles the one who said that?
Jordan said that about Charles.
Wow.
Yeah. He said his suffering, he suffered a lot, like he really suffered, but that suffering has been kind of transformed into beauty, transformed into something that is higher. And so not everybody's an artist, but you can see, if you've met people that have suffered a lot, and I'm someone who actually hasn't suffered much, but like if you meet people that have suffered a lot and they have suffered well, I don't know how else to say it, or suffered in a way that is like a yes, I don't know how, they tend to have a specific magic about them, which is hard to describe, right? They tend to have a kind of glory, a kind of something about them which is hard to, which transcends the normal world. And so I think that's, it's not that God causes suffering, is that suffering, the Christian way to describe it, that suffering is part and parcel of the world of the fall, right? And that in the world of the fall, suffering is the thing we need to deal with, but that God is able to transform suffering into something else. Okay. And that's what the cross is. Like, that's what Jesus on the cross means. That it's God transforming suffering into something which is more. But it's hard to talk about, because it's like, I don't want people to think that I'm trying to delegitimize suffering, or I'm trying to diminish this type of suffering that people live. But I think that at least in my experience, when I met people that have suffered and have endured or transcended, they are way more than people that haven't.
I would say also, if like I've suffered quite a bit, and I think the only way, this was before any type of Christianity, how I kind of figured it out. And I thought the only way that could be worth it, whatever worth it means, would be if other people don't have to experience it, right? If I just quantified it and I could help other people not experience that, then it would even out. It'd be like, whatever that meant. And so that's how I kind of figured it out.
Yeah, that's a great way to understand it. And you can see it like at many, many levels where, like, who's the person helping out alcoholics the most? It's always an ex-alcoholic, right? Who's the person helping, abuse victims? Who's the person helping people who suffer? It's usually someone who has suffered. And so there's a way that you can see that, like, it really is this image of transforming suffering into blessing, transforming suffering into something else, which is actually manifesting the compassion, God's compassion in the world through us, right? We always ask ourselves, like, why is God doing this, or why is God not doing this? And the answer is, we are the body. Like, we are the body of the divine in the world. We are the hands and feet of God. And so it's through us that those things happen. So I think that's the best way to see it.
Why do you think these, and I don't know if anybody can actually answer these questions, but why is it that some people can, I guess, like, come to God so easily compared to other people? Like, I feel like I had to see some crazy things before I was like, okay, that makes sense. But some people are just like, no, I've believed it since I was a kid. And I know you can grow up in families that believe, but not everybody in a family that believes grows up and believes. But why do you think some people are just like, yep, no, it makes sense? And other people are like, you just don't get it at all.
I don't know how to totally answer that question. Like, I think there are probably a whole host of reasons, like a whole host of, and so especially I think that it's mostly true that what you're saying is mostly true now. Like, it's not, I don't think it would have been so true in a world where most people were Christian. It's kind of weirdly true in a world that's very atheistic and kind of very secular, where people, somehow think that they're living outside of this pattern that we described, but they're wrong, right? And they think that they're living outside of it. In a more normal world, people would always know that they're kind of inside this giant, let's say, pattern that's moving up towards the infinite. But for us, we tend to think that we can live outside it, and so I think that it is also like a manifest. It has something to do with the modern world. It has something to do with our kind of secular world but I think that world is ending really fast, by the way.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, we're on the cusp of like major transformations in terms of how the religious is pouring back into reality. And and it's something that I intuited a while ago. And to be honest, like, I intuited that your dad was going to participate in that. And so despite not being a particularly religious person himself, like, it's pretty much playing itself out. But it's also playing itself out for ill. Like, it's not only for good. There's a lot of the religious things seeping back in that are pretty dark. And so you can see like in a lot of the COVID stuff, there's a lot of religiosity in the way that people deal with COVID, in the way that people deal with woke culture. It's becoming more and more religious in its instantiations. And so I would say like re-enchantment is kind of happening for the dark and the light part of it. So hopefully we can participate in the light part of it.
Yeah. Wow. That's wild. I think you're right, though.
I mean, if you intuited that like around you, notice that all of a sudden all these people are suddenly people who never could have even thought about God or religion or prayer. And all of a sudden, it's possible. Like the things that I'm telling you 10 years ago, no one would have even understood what I was talking about. A lot of the stuff that we're now able to talk about, it just would have been complete gibberish to the Dawkins type 10 years ago. And so now all of a sudden this whole world is opened up. And then you realize, you see all these people, just all of a sudden it just becomes obvious that they need to have some kind of religious practice. They need to be connected to community. They need to be connected to something higher than themselves. So.
Yeah, that's wild. Okay, I had a list of questions. We didn't get to any of them. But one of the things I've been reading the Bible and praying and being, and also kind of trying to research, because I don't really know any of the background on Christianity or what the difference between Catholics and Protestants are. I was just like, I know, Catholics have the Pope. Like I'm really starting from
You're at base level, pretty much.
Base level. Yeah. I was Googling what's the difference between all the different denominations and all that. So Dad told me that you grew up in a Catholic family, but switched to Orthodox.
I grew up in a Protestant, like a Baptist evangelical family.
Okay.
And then I became Orthodox. Yeah.
Okay. So what's the difference between those two? What does Orthodox mean?
What does Orthodox mean? So I want to be careful I want to try not to offend too many people, because obviously it becomes prickly when you start trying to describe what other people believe. And so, so Orthodoxy is more ritualized, you could say. And so it's more like a Catholic church. If you would go into an Orthodox church, for example, it's singing the whole time. And, the priests have vestments that are symbolic. There are paintings on the walls that are symbolic. Everything they do is almost like a dance of a worshipful dance, you could say. And so that's, in terms of experience, that's what you would probably see the difference when you walked into an Orthodox church. There'll be icons, there'll be censer, there'd be like smoke rising up with smells, and be candles. So it's like it has this kind of ritual embodied aspect. And evangelicals and Protestants are more informal. They tend to emphasize the informal more, right? Like God, I can talk to God anytime I want. I can, it's like God, Jesus is my friend, that type of way of seeing it, where, it's more testimonies. And so it's in the experience, that's usually for someone who doesn't know anything about, let's say, the differences, that's how you would probably experience the difference. So let's say evangelicals and kind of Protestants tend to emphasize personal experience, personal testimony, the idea of sin also, right? Like God saved me from my sins. Whereas in the Orthodox tradition, it's more about this kind of coming together in worship and participating in something that is beyond you and becoming, let's say, the body of Christ in that way. So that's the experience. But then in terms of theology, there's a bunch of stuff. Like I'm sure you don't necessarily want to get into that right away. But at some point, I think you just need to move slowly, and at some point you'll start to kind of see and understand the differences. Let's say.
I don't like moving slowly in regards to anything.
Well, then you can read books. Like it's probably better to read books than to go online too much, because man, the online world is
it's a mess. Okay. Do you have book suggestions then? And I also, after this, I want to ask you what the difference between Catholicism is. And why is it that Protestants don't believe some of the Catholic books? I have so many questions. But first, hey there. Sorry to interrupt the episode, but I stay working because of these ads. And I love Schwank grills. You probably know I'm very experienced at cooking meat because of my diet, so I really know what I'm talking about, to put it bluntly. Schwank grills are some of the best in the market. Schwank's heating technology has been used by the world's best steakhouses since the 1980s. These portable American-made grills reach 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit without smoking, are super easy to clean, and get you high-quality, steakhouse-worthy steaks in about 3 minutes. You know when it's crispy, but medium rare and juicy underneath? Maillard reactions if you want to sound fancy. But it's not just steaks. You can make just about anything on these grills. Chicken, hamburgers, veggies. It's even got a pizza stone for pizza eaters, which applies to most people, I realize. Head to schwankgrills.com today and get $150 off a Schwank 1,500 degree grill when using promo code MP at checkout. Again, that's $150 off over at Schwank Grills. That's SCHWANK grills.com with code MP at checkout. Everything's in the description linked. Enjoy the rest of the episode. What book should I read?
Well, it depends. For what? Like, what would you want to understand? Like, let's say, what are you looking for?
I think I'd probably be interested in understanding how people connect with God, how people think they connect with God. Because you just said there's differences between, say, Orthodoxy and Protestants. And I think what I'm more familiar with is Protestantism. I think that's what I'm familiar with. That's what you mostly know.
And so let's say the Orthodox tradition and the Catholic Church, the Orthodox even more so, it's more mystical. It doesn't tend to talk about our interaction with God in a manner that is that's like a conversation. It's like I'm talking to God, and then you have these answers in your life. The Orthodoxy tends to have this notion that you need to be transformed, and you kind of you become God by participation. You know, through prayer, through certain types of through asceticism, through trying to kind of remove yourself from your passions. Then you actually are transformed into something more than yourself. And so that's a little bit of a difference in terms of, let's say, the way that people connect with God. And it's going to look differently. So that's why there'll be less in a kind of, especially the modern evangelical services, you know, let's say the songs, they sound like pop songs. They sound like love songs, basically. But they talk about God like they would in a pop song. And that's something that you wouldn't find, let's say, in the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Church, where there's more this reverence and this sense of, you know, that God is really is beyond us and is above us and is bringing us up into Him, you know, something like that. I know people in the YouTube comments are going to get super annoyed with the way I'm describing this because, you know, everybody, that's why I said it's hard to talk about other people's thing. But I can send you, like, there's a book called it's in terms of Orthodoxy. There's a little book called The Orthodox Way, which is a not very long, and it's a book that kind of explains this kind of mystical approach to the faith, you know, and how it connects to us today. So yeah, you can look that up. I can send you a link if you want. Okay,
that would be good. I've been talking to like lots of people about this, and I'll come across people and they'll be, you know, different denominations or Catholic or, you know, something, and they'll be like, oh no, this is the way because of, you know, X. And
yeah, there's an overlap thing.
But yeah.
I'm trying to not go into theology too much with you, just because it's like, I think I really dislike arguing about religion. I would rather try to help you. I'd rather give you ways to kind of see the beauty of the Christian tradition and the beauty that's there. But there are other people who definitely would try to convince you. So
yeah, there's got to be some good, like even the differences you just described. Couldn't it be both?
Yes, could it not be? Yeah, both? Definitely. But I'm just giving you kind of basic, let's say basic directions, you could say. And so let's say the Protestant Church is really fruit of the modern world. Like it's very modern in everything that about it, the way that it understands God, the way that it understands the world, the way that it does worship. All of this is very modern. Whereas, let's say, the Catholic Church and the Orthodox Church, they're kind of, it's like a stream which comes down from millennia, and the sense of connection between all these different generations, and that we kind of receive what is before us, and this kind of participation in the stream. So that will definitely affect everything about it. So, right. So the Catholic and the Orthodox, especially, like, they'll talk about the 4th century as if they're still there. They'll talk about the 10th century as if they're still there. For them, all of this is part of their experience. Like all of these great Christians that have really showed us God and have manifested love and God in the world, we see them as kind of our ancestors, that we continue their story. And so that'll definitely, whereas the evangelical Protestant will say, how can we adapt Christianity? How can we reach out to people, right? It's like, we want to do it in a way that people will understand. And so they'll tend to adapt Christianity to popular forms. That's why it sounds like that's why it's a concert. That's why it's jazzy, or it's like it looks like something you would see at a show, because they're more focused on how can we adapt this to people and to the modern world. So it's just different. It really definitely is different approaches.
Interesting. Okay. I'm going to have
what
to
you
read
should
it.
probably do is you should probably go physically, let's say, to a Catholic church, and then go physically to find an Orthodox church in English and then go to an evangelical church. Like give yourself a few months to see, because it's we can talk about it, but it's not the same as going and having the experience of the space and the people and the type of worship and the type of
That's got to be super dependent on the church, though, right? I know I've been to. I remember this was before I don't even know what you call it. What do you call it? Tuned in? Like,
yeah.
This is before I tuned in. I went to a couple of church services with my mom, and I was little, so maybe I was just too little to be able to pay attention. But I remember just like that was not for me at all. It was like, this is like, one of them I think was Catholic, and it was just like, there's nothing that speaks to me at all. There's somebody talking, I don't understand. There's no emotion, right? So I think, wouldn't that be very dependent on where you'd go? Like there must be better churches.
Oh, for sure. I mean, for sure, there are better versions of every single type of church. That's for certain. But in general, you'll still have a basic experience of the difference. So, for example, like if you go to a liturgical church, like a church that has a more ritualized form, then there'll be less extreme emotion. That's for sure, like 100%. It'll be more contemplative. It'll be more kind of this standing in silence, and kind of contemplating the mystery, kind of approaching slowly, and also being attentive to your thoughts, trying to kind of move in, and not be distracted. All of that is the type of experience you'll have. If you go to a more, a more modern evangelical type church, then it'll be way more emotional, because then you'll have a pop singer, a guy with a guitar. It'll be a rock concert. It'll be a really dynamic speaker that's going to be super involved. And so, yeah, it really does. There is a difference for sure.
But then or you said Orthodoxy was more spiritual, right?
I think so. I think that it's more it's more mystical for sure. It has this
mystical.
It has it has this idea that you're to be transformed through attention, through discipline, through prayer, through and I mean, of course, also the love of others. Like all of this kind of is this symphony. But if you go to an Orthodox church and you're expecting to be entertained, it's not going to happen. Like you're not going to be entertained, because it's not meant to be entertaining. It's meant to ask you to make a little bit of an effort in order to be attentive, and a little bit of an effort in order to participate. And so, for example, like in a lot of Orthodox churches, there are no benches. You can't sit. You're not supposed to relax. You're supposed to be there and try to be attentive and to kind of be present rather than sit back and enjoy, those are different stances.
And then Protestants too, probably.
But Protestants are so big. Like the thing is, I want to be careful because like when I say the way I'm talking about Protestants is really like modern evangelical churches that you'll probably find mostly in where you are in Tennessee. But there are some Protestant churches that are not like that are more formal, that are more ritualized, that have more structure. So it really depends.
Yeah.
Protestant church is like once the Reformation happened, it's like scattered into thousands and thousands of little denominations. It was like a thing falling on the ground and just exploding into like thousands of denominations. So it's hard to talk about Protestantism as one thing. It's like thousands of things.
Okay. So it's been an hour and I could talk for a very long time because I have a whole bunch more questions. But maybe
it's up to you.
Are you free for a little bit longer?
Yes, I am free. So yeah, we could keep going.
Okay, cool. Let's talk a little bit longer then. Okay. Reformation. Let's start with that. What exactly happened there? And I've looked this up before, but yeah, can you describe what? No, this is like
that's
I'm
fine.
starting
I will I'll mostly try not to be polemical because it's hard. Because I have my perspective on the Reformation. And so the Reformation is, so the church, let's say the Christian church is an institution, right? It's a human institution supposed to serve God, but sometimes, often it doesn't. And so it tends down, let's say. So things get bad, people get corrupt, people start doing weird stuff. And then usually there's a wake up, a reformation, a little reformation. And then it gets realigned, you could say. And so in the history of the Catholic Church in the West, there are many of these reforms before the Reformation, right? There's the Gregorian reform. There's a Cluniac, the kind of Cluniac reform. There's these different reforms that happen where people are trying to bring people back to the good stuff instead of the corruption and the chaos. And so during a certain time, there was a lot of corruption and a lot of bad stuff happening. And then a monk protested against that corruption. And this time, it was different because this time, because the church will tend to censor those people. Like if someone tries to rock the boat, they'll be like, shh, stop rocking the boat. And so Luther was censored by the church said, no, you're wrong. And they started arguing with him. And usually what will happen is there'll be arguments. And then at some point, the church will say, you can't stop saying what you're saying, and then there might be consequences if they don't. But Luther aligned himself with princes in Germany and then was able to separate himself from the Catholic Church. So that's the difference.
You said printers.
No, with princes, with
princes. Okay.
Yeah, princes. So princes, so different state actors in Germany were, and so he was able to separate himself from the church. And then what happened is that started to accelerate. And so they started to, different reformers started to say their own thing, and they were fighting amongst the reformers as well. And a lot of it had to do with the idea of salvation by grace alone, which is the idea that you're not saved by works. So it's not what you do that saves you. It's something, it's a gift from God. God gives you salvation, basically. And then the reformers started to argue amongst themselves. And it was also like a real Bible emphasis. So sola scriptura, right? Sola fide, sola gratia. So it was like, you're saved by faith alone. You're saved by grace alone. That is, that it's God that saves you. And it happens through the means of trust in God and faith. And then the testimony of that is in the Bible. The Bible is the highest
Okay.
let's say, the highest revelation of God in the world, or the revelation of God in the world. It's like the ultimate authority. So you can't go against the Bible. The Bible is the ultimate authority in the world. And so that, let's say that's the basis of the Reformation, you could say. But then the reformers start to argue, and then there starts to be state churches. And that's the play out of the Reformation, is that some princes also use the Reformation as a political tool to separate themselves and control the church. So then you have the Church of England, who who the head of the church is the king, and then you have the different churches, different national churches they become state churches, where the priests are actually state employees, basically, right? And then out of that, you have people say, no, that wasn't the point of the Reformation. You can't have state churches, that wasn't the point of what we're doing. And so they become more radical, and they're like, no, we need to separate from that. And then you have Puritans and Anabaptists and people who are like, no, we don't want these state churches. We just want to be the body of God and to be these churches. And so then they start to separate. And then they fight amongst each other. Then they separate, and they fight amongst each other, and they separate. And then at some point you have 10,000 denominations of Christians, right? And so the Reformation, that's basically, you could say, the story of the Reformation.
Okay. So
where you are, you'll meet mostly people that are children of the Reformation.
Yeah. Okay. Where was I going with this next? It's a lot to think about.
So I tried to be very objective. I do not agree with the Reformation. Like, I think the Reformation is a mistake. I'm sure you could discern it, but I tried to be, for all the Protestants watching this, I tried to be as objective as I could be without pretending that I agree with it. I don't think the Reformation was good.
Okay. Why don't you think the Reformation was good?
There are a few things. Like, one is the mess that was already kind of there, right? And so the idea that salvation is something that you can either win through works or that you could get freely through grace is already a problem. Like, that's already a problem. So when you start to argue that way, where it's like, how many good things can I do to be saved? Or then, oh no, I can't do enough good things to be saved. So God has to save me because I can't do enough good things to be saved, right? So it's like this, it's like a moralistic system. It's like a moralistic system of where you do good to please God. It's like you have this daddy, and this daddy wants you to do good things, but you can't. And so he's like, you can't do the good things that you need to be in my world. And so what I'll do is I'll give it to you. Like I'll bring, it's an act of grace, right? And so to me, that's the problem. So the problem with the Reformation was a deeper problem, was already a problem that was there in Europe at the time, where it was this legalistic kind of arbitrary idea of doing good things to be good enough to go to heaven. And so that's why I think the Reformation is a problem, but it was not just the Reformation. The church, the Catholic Church itself, was in a tough place because they had already set up this weird legal system. It's like weird legal system of like the idea, for example, that if you do so many bad things, then you go to purgatory for so many years, and then you have to do so many things to reduce the number of years in purgatory, like that kind of thing. Where did that
come from? Is that's not in the Bible somewhere, right?
No, it comes from the idea that it's a how can I say this? It's a side effect of this kind of legal way of thinking about salvation, right? It's a side effect of the.
How do you explain that if it's not in the Bible in the first place?
Well, see, that's again, one of the problems that happens is that the idea that the Bible is the only source of reality, let's say, or only source of truth. That's something that the reformers say.
So what's on the other side?
So like,
that's what I've been hearing.
The reformers say, like, if it's not in the Bible, it's not true. And then it's like, okay, so, but that wasn't the standard before. Now, I don't want to defend the way that the Catholics had their notion of purgatory. I'm not Catholic, so I don't feel like I have to defend that. But the idea that if it's not in the Bible, then it's not real. It's just.
So where's all the other information then?
So let's say the way that the more traditional churches understand it, and the way that the Catholic and the Orthodox understand it, is that the church is a body of people, right? The church isn't a book. God isn't a book. The Bible isn't the word of God. Jesus Christ is the word of God. It's the manifestation of the divine logos of God in the world. That's the word of God. The Bible is super important. Like the Bible is a good means to help to prevent yourself from going into chaos, let's say. But the reality is more linked to the actual body of people, and let's say their connection to Christ through generations of people that transmit not just a bunch of books, but a way of being and a way of praying and a way of seeing God and a way of engaging with God. So that's the way the traditional churches understand it, that there's a transmission, right? More like your father can write you a letter, and that's good, but he won't contain his being in the letter. It'll be in his example. The example that you get, like let's say you model your life on his example. And so if he writes a letter to say you should do this, you should do that, it's like, that's great. I'll keep it. It's great advice. But the higher thing is the model. And so that's the way that the traditional church understood it. So it's like they have traditions which flow down from the apostles into the church.
Okay.
So it's a different way of seeing it. But the biggest important thing is that, for example, in the more mystical way of understanding Christianity, it's like, it's not about doing good things to go to heaven. It was never about that. And it was never about not being able to do enough good things in order to go to heaven. It's about becoming something, that you become heaven, you could say. You're transformed into something that's free. And that's going up the mountain or moving up towards something higher. So it's more about, so the idea that, let's say, you shouldn't lie isn't about like, well, if I lie so many times, then I'll have so many years in purgatory or whatever. It's about, if you lie, you are destroying yourself and you're destroying the world around you. If you tell the truth, then you're building yourself and you're building the world around you. And that will transform you into something more than what you were before. And so the Christian life now doesn't become a bunch of stuff you have to do. It becomes a bunch of ways you have to be in order to be transformed into something more. So that's more the mystical, and I think it's the original way of understanding Christianity. So by the time you come to the argument of like, can I do enough things to please God or not please God? It's like, it's all arbitrary. It's like, that's not the idea. The idea is that you're becoming in the image of Christ by embodying these patterns, by embodying this way of being, by putting your attention towards God above you, by putting your energy and your attention towards the thing that transcend you. You're being transformed into the thing that you're focusing on. You're slowly becoming in the image of Christ.
Okay, so that sounds a lot like what my dad teaches.
That's why everybody jokes about Jordan and says that he's like a pre-Orthodox. Like he that's why there's so many Orthodox have connected to what he says, is that, you know, although there's a lot of things that he says that they don't agree with, but in terms of just the basic trope of transformation and of understanding the way the world kind of we participate in the world, it's much closer to Orthodox, let's say, way of being.
Okay, so then my one question, and then we should wrap it up. My last question, I think, would be, so if Protestants are, you know, the Bible is the most important thing, Word of God, they've got that, and you're saying that it's this tradition, how do people who are joining know that the tradition they're seeing in Orthodoxy is real?
Well, usually, I mean, it's the testimony of the saints. That is, it's the glowing examples of people who shine, right? And so we have all these testimonies, all these stories of people that are bright, that are amazing, that are just beyond the normal human way of seeing, and so they kind of are fruits of this body. They're the fruits of this process. And I think that's the most existential way. But you could also do it. We could also argue in terms of theology and metaphysics and all that. And some people love doing that. You'll find them all around. I don't tend to think that way. I do also think that we could argue about it in terms of biblical interpretation, all that we could argue. But I think that ultimately that's closer to what I think is the life of the church, is that you have these fruits that appear that are these bright lights, and they kind of help you see what's possible. And you kind of see in the saints that, oh, wow, there's something, some people can be more than what I am, and that gives you hope, and it gives you models to kind of move.
Okay, that part makes sense to me. I think the part that I'd be concerned with is joining a church that has gone sideways, that like isn't what it appears under the guise of orthodoxy or under the guise of Catholicism or something. I don't know if that's me being paranoid, but is there a way to feel it out to make sure that the direction you're going is in alignment?
Yeah, I mean, I can't be in your experience. That's why I said a good idea would be maybe to kind of have those experiences, and there's also a difference between the local experience of something also, or the local instantiation of something, and then the bigger frame in which it exists. So for example, let's say the Catholic tradition or the Orthodox tradition, they have bad priests, and you'll find bad priests and bad parishes and people that are corrupt. They're everywhere in the world. But nonetheless, there is something which is, let's say, there's something unified and something real that happens. And the same thing if you go to Protestant church, like you can go to Protestant church that is completely pathological, like that can happen, So, I mean, I think you're, I think you have you're low enough on agreeableness that you're not the kind of person that's in danger of falling into a cult. At least that's my impression. So. I might be wrong, but
no, I don't. I'd hope not. Anyway, I'd be more likely to start a cult. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do that either.
That sounds right. So I would say don't do that. Don't start a cult. Don't start go to an actual church and don't start having just Bible meetings in your house. That's probably better for you not to do that. Okay. To actually try to connect with other people. Because you have that, people do that all the time. It's they don't like all the churches they find, so they're like, I'm going to start my own church, and then they become pastor so and so, self-declared pastor so and so. And that's not great.
Okay. Well, that was really fun. We should do that again. That didn't even scratch the surface of questions, but maybe send me that book. I'll read that book.
Yeah, anytime. I'd be very happy to talk to you anytime.
Cool. Okay. I'm going to take you up on that offer. It was nice meeting you.
All right. It's good to meet you, Mikhaila.